Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Mahoney, and I'm one of the CSPC program coordinator members. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's event. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Canadian Science Policy Conference is taking place on unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We respect our traditional hosts and thank them for allowing us to operate on the land. So today we're about to participate in an interactive panel titled Research Security Within the Canadian Research Institutions, organized, I'm just about to have a moment here, by ISED and, sorry guys, how many times have we met? And brain fart, excuse me guys, so they're organized by ISED. So just on behalf of CSPC, I'd like to remind you to tweet about this event and others, and you can use the @SciencePolicy and the hashtag CSPC 2022. Also, please don't forget to fill out the survey at the end of the session, because that survey is really important for informing subsequent iterations of the CSPC conference. So with that, I will hand it over to your moderator for today.
Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Wendy Thérien. I'm Wendy Thérien. I am the vice-directrice adjointe des relations gouvernementales à l'Université de Sherbrooke et directrice de cabinet. I am the Associate Vice President, Government Relations at the University of Sherbrooke and Chief of Staff to President Pierre Cossette. And it is my pleasure to be here with you this morning to discuss a topic that is near and dear to my heart. This morning, we are joined by Nigel Smith, Executive Director and CEO of Triumph, Dr. Charmaine Dean, Vice President of Research at the University of Waterloo, and Dr. David McGee, Vice President of Research at the University of New Brunswick. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. This morning, we'll have an opportunity to hear from each one of our panelists for about 5 minutes each. They will share a few of their insights, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask them a few questions that we've discussed in advance. And then we're hoping to have a good portion of time to hear your questions. This is a field where we need to talk to each other and share information and share the concerns, the questions that we have. And so we're hoping to have about a third of our time to do that today. And so with no further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Nigel Smith to open us this morning.
Thank you. Is this on? No. Number 3? Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. So good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by acknowledging that Triumph is located, it's in Vancouver on the UBC lands, and it's located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. That land has always been used as a place of learning by the Musqueam, and who for millennia have passed on their knowledge, their traditions, and their history from one generation to the next. And that fits very well with Triumph's mission. So I'm Nigel Smith. I'm Executive Director and CEO of Triumph. My background is a physicist. I was waiting for the stampede out the back, but that didn't happen. That was good. My background is a physicist. I've worked in some fairly extreme environments. That includes Antarctica, but most of my life has been down mines, down salt mines or nickel mines, looking for dark matter. And that's a potential new type of particle that we know, well, we hope might exist in the universe. So my background is generally in physics, but I've worked in some fairly extreme environments, which means that I've got a very acute understanding of how research facilities themselves operate. I came to Canada in 2009 to run Snow Lab, which is Canada's deep underground facility located near Sudbury. It's in a nickel mine, 2 kilometers underground. And last year transferred over to run Triumph. So as CEO and Executive Director, my role at Triumph, which is Canada's Particle Accelerator Centre, my role encompasses basically the entire operation. Triumph was founded in 1968, so we have quite a long history, and it's fundamentally a university-based research infrastructure. There are currently 14, soon to be 21 universities engaged in research at Triumph. And we are classed as a major research facility. And so we act both on a national and an international scale and that's the connection into research security. So for us, security covers many different areas. There is physical security. We are regulated by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, so we have to demonstrate physical security to ensure that we're not losing any of the nuclear material. We have IP security. That's a very strong area that we're working on at the moment in terms of how we ensure that we're translating IP we generate for the benefit of Canada. We have data management, and obviously an area that's kicking off at the is very strongly being looked at the moment is the geopolitical angle and how we ensure engagement on a geopolitical side. So that's my very brief introduction.
Good morning, everyone. I would also like to acknowledge that at the University of Waterloo, which is where I'm from, much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. Our campus is situated on land called the Haldimand Tract. This was land that was granted to the Six Nations. It includes 6 miles on each side of a river running through the region called the Grand River. And not just the university, but in fact, much of the individuals, the residences for individuals working at Waterloo live on this Haldimand Tract. We've been doing a lot of work towards reconciliation through our research, our learning, our teaching, and working with communities, and it's coordinated in our Indigenous Initiatives Office. So my role is not just as a Vice President Research. I have 3 portfolios under my office. One is called Waterloo Ventures, and that deals with commercialization and entrepreneurship. One is Waterloo International, and so I'm also the Vice President International. And then the third is the Office of Research. So I'm jumping right into the research security realm, though I will add a little bit of a lens, as Nigel did, in that I am a data scientist and I work in machine learning principally, and have done also some work in analytics related to work with corporate partners. So I have experience in the corporate partnership side, as well as the entrepreneurship side and in the analytics side. So, for us at the University of Waterloo, there are very many sensitive areas of technology that are a focus. I think you know that we have a very large engineering school, the largest in Canada, and then we have a unique situation where we have a faculty of mathematics that incorporates computer science as a principal driver there. So areas such as artificial intelligence, robotics, autonomous systems, these are all under rapid development at the University of Waterloo. And they are all areas of really transformative research that will transform the world in so many different ways. So we have been paying a lot of attention to research security, and that is under a couple of lenses. First is, and I have already mentioned, the commercialization and entrepreneurship side that lies in my office. The first is that we have a rich ecosystem of entrepreneurs that are in the region. So the Waterloo-Toronto corridor is a very big corridor of startups and ventures for the Ontario region. So we are very, very careful about IP and IP development. And then secondarily, on the international side, there are very many international partnerships that we want to make sure they thrive. And how can we make sure that they thrive under the current systems where there are barriers in the terms of researchers understanding how to navigate systems to support risk mitigation strategies and to support rapid development? So we have at Waterloo developed what I'll call an all-of-campus approach. Given the very many sensitive technologies And I failed to mention quantum, which is a key driver for us, as well as nano. Given these sensitive technologies, we've developed an all-of-campus approach, and we have a whole variety of areas that are considered under a research, I'll call it a strategy for risk mitigation and protection of IP. So it is a research security strategy that is driven by a group of individuals under the leadership of a new director of research security who is actually in the audience here today. And it encompasses exactly, I'll mention Nigel's. It's not just the research angle and helping researchers understand how to protect their systems and their IP, but it also involves the advancement office. It involves the international office. It also involves our chief information officer and the networks and device security, and also guidelines for travel. So much as is seen in the national security guidelines, we've mimicked that at the University of Waterloo. We have both a working group and a community of practice to help support researchers understand the challenges they face, how to navigate the system, and also how to support that we can do research globally and collaboratively in a positive manner. So I'll leave it at that and pass it on to David.
Thank you. Thank you, Charmaine. And like Charmaine and Justin, I'd like to thank the opportunity to be here this morning. And I'm visiting the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. So I'm visiting from the unceded and unsurrendered Wolastoqey territory of the Wabanaki people, where the two campuses of the of the University of New Brunswick reside. I want to give you start a little bit by giving you a little sense of UNB and our position within the university landscape within Canada. We are New Brunswick's only comprehensive university, and as being the only research comprehensive university in New Brunswick, that does put us in a rather prominent position within the province. One where the majority of the research done in New Brunswick is through the University of New Brunswick. Although our institution is not as large as many, it nevertheless has critical research infrastructure, not just in our province, but certainly in the region. We are relatively, I think, relative to the larger universities in Canada, we are somewhat on the small side. So I think we are ultimately the smallest research comprehensive university in Canada at about 9,500 students, and of those 9,500, about 1,000 of those students are research-based graduate students. So there's a fair bit of research activity going on in the province. Like Charmaine said, we have a number of critical research that's going on. We are a very much more of a STEM-heavy university, which means a lot of our research intensity is in the areas of engineering, computer science, and forestry and environmental management. So again, similar challenges as to what other universities have in Canada. We do about a little over $50 million worth of research revenue in a year, and a large majority of that comes from non-governmental sources, which is code word for we have an awful lot of partners that we are dealing with, and many of those partners are regional players, national players, and international players. And with the growing, I'll say, sensitivity within Canada to our research and protecting our research, and especially the IP that is generated from that research. As that has gained prominence within Canada, that is therefore being translated down to universities for that increased prominence as well. And one of the challenges we face, we are not clearly to the same degree as what Charmaine outlined in Waterloo as having a completely across the university approach. One of the challenges that the smaller universities face within Canada is really one of resources. And as Charmaine mentioned, I also have the Office of Research Services, which comes under my portfolio, which is often the point for coordinating all research activities at the universities. And so when we are talking about any grant or contract that researchers are looking to participate in, then they will go through our office, which means that with the increased scrutiny on who we are partnering with and are they good partners, safe partners for us to be working with, et cetera. That's falling again to that office, which is pretty, I think, consistent across Canada. And you will have the whole gamut within Canada of different size offices, those of 2 to 3 people in smaller universities, to those with literally 100 people or thereabouts in their offices. And so that's kind of the dynamic that we deal with. There's research happening at all universities across Canada, regardless of their size. And there's research happening with partners in all universities across Canada, regardless of size. And as research security becomes increasingly important and prevalent, it's going to be a challenge for all of us to be able to work together and to really ensure that we are protecting our research to the best of our abilities. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you very much. You've named a lot of different areas: quantum, big data, nanotechnologies. To advance in any of those sectors, we know that collaboration, whether with private sector partners, across universities, across the globe, is essential. It's part of our culture at universities to work together. And so my first question is, how do you balance open science and research security in an increasingly collaborative environment? Where also at the same time, the issues of research security are also global. Maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you, Wendy. So this is a challenging question, clearly. And I think one of the ways to look at this perhaps is with a historical lens from my field, which is particle and nuclear physics. And over the last 70 years, there's an example where science has really been used for diplomacy, and that's the CERN Accelerator Complex in Geneva. That was brought together basically by national treaty after the end of the Second World War to do exactly that point of bringing the world together. And so the concept of science for diplomacy is actually very well embedded into particle and nuclear physics. But I think it's also embedded into many researchers and the way that they think that working with individuals is the way to actually work together, get new ideas, and national barriers may not come into that sort of thinking. So the researchers are used to working across national boundaries, and CERN is an example, to say, where you would have nation states that may actually be less than friendly. Not quite sure how to phrase this in a public environment, but less than friendly. And you would find people working on the same experiment at CERN and managing to work collaboratively in that mode. So the focus there, I think, is on the individual versus the nation state. And that's fundamentally the driver for open science, is making sure that you're able to do that networking, making sure that you have the ability to connect with those individuals around the world that have the knowledge and the drive that you're looking for. The counterpoint, of course, is the requirement to protect IP in some sense. And I think this is perhaps where there is a distinction between the research world, understanding or trying to deliver research and get scientific results, compared to the IP delivery and exploitation. And there is a very clear distinction between those two areas. So the counterpoint in terms of protecting IP requires the concept of research security. I was just in the NCE panel prior to this, and the concept of a Canadian network working in a global world has very similar constructs to research, where you're working in you're supported from Canada, but you are working in a global research endeavor. One of the things that has also come to light very clearly over the last few years, of course, is the concept of national resilience. And that has implications definitely in certain areas, so biotech, vaccines, and so on. The concept of a global network just collapsed as soon as COVID hit, and people were rightly providing vaccines to their citizens rather than looking at it as a global problem. And I think that adds another layer in terms of ensuring that Canada has national resilience and the ability to basically exploit the IP that it has. So it is a challenging problem. I think it does depend on the area of research and the phase at which that research is. So something that you might view as more blue skies, perhaps, in terms of CERN, nuclear science. It's pretty straightforward to think about that as science for diplomacy without needing to think about the national barriers. But then, of course, we're in a geopolitical world, and even at CERN, the war in the Ukraine is now obviously having impact. So CERN has made declarations that Russian institutions cannot participate in CERN research and be published on CERN published papers. That has direct implications for early career scientists who may have started working in the area, especially, of course, the Russian ones. And this clearly has that implication of science for diplomacy breaking down when you have that national overlay that we are not going to engage with Russia as a nation state. I would point out that it is possible to resolve this, though, and again, nuclear is an area where that comes through in that following the Manhattan Program, of course, there was a lot of interest in nuclear weapons around the world. There's a lot of interest in nuclear for science, and labs have managed to work out how to do both of those. So many of the US national labs, for instance, have engagement in both aspects of nuclear weapons and civilian nuclear power and nuclear science. And it's firewalled. It's firewalled in a way which is information that is required for developing a nuclear capacity is very clearly firewalled compared to information based on general nuclear science. So there are strategies that have been adopted, for instance, in places like Los Alamos, which allows the researchers to be engaged in pure science, which is actually what drives most people, to be honest, is you want to attract the best researchers you can, and telling physicists that you're only going to work on nuclear weapons is a bit of a downer. Right? So what they try to do there, and to be honest, that was a decision that many of us had to make. So I grew up in an era where I made an active decision not to work in nuclear weaponry, right, as a nuclear physicist. So many of us have to make those decisions. And Los Alamos, in terms of the security question, has managed to balance that to attract people, to ensure that the national knowledge is retained and is secure.
Thank you very much. Dr. Dean or Dr. McGee, would you like to add anything?
I'll be very brief. A really good remarks there by Nigel in opening. So Nigel talked about supply chains and supply chains needing to make sure that Canada had vaccines. But if we go a little bit further back than that, we all knew at the start of the pandemic that we were facing something really difficult. And what did we do in that situation? We realized that everybody had to come together globally to be able to solve the problem. So understandably, we do want to make sure that we have vaccines. So when manufacturing started, that does need a consideration of how we make sure we have our citizens protected. But really, right at the start, when the world is faced with a really serious problem, what we wanted to do back then was bring everybody together on the globe to solve it, and to solve it in a collaborative manner. So the international collaborations, those are really important for critical issues, and sustainability is another such issue. But what is important in this discussion is that we're talking about theft and individuals losing their IP, and how we can make sure that that does not happen. What are the risk mitigation strategies to support an individual being able to commercialize or make sure that they own the products that are being created, and also Canada as a country, that we protect it as a whole in terms of making sure there's risk mitigation for us with regards the sorts of research that are being done and how it's escaping the country and being lost inadvertently. Mm-hmm. So there is a balancing act between the two, I would say. Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Mengi.
Thanks, Wendy. Just and I'll be quick as well. Just a couple of things I think on the idea of open science. I think we've been moving in that direction for a while now, and especially with Tri-Council kind of leading that with the implementation of research repositories now being required for any sponsored research by them, and research data management repositories, et cetera, coming quickly online. I think next year. With that, and so we're moving in that direction, and I think that is that's all positive, and researchers will be tuning into that. So I mean, I think for the open science part, that's the one point that Charmaine made, I think, which is important, is really around this topic about its protection of our research and how do we ensure that, and this, I think, from a unit, primarily from universities' perspective, has really come to the fore not very long ago. Roughly a year ago is when ISED and NSERC through their Alliance program really began this pilot that we're in, and going to move on from a pilot very quickly. And again, I think it's going to come down to working with our researchers in education. And it will be really critical to tap into our new researchers that are joining every year, because this is going to be completely new to them, and making sure that that's part of our orientation packages that we meet and discuss with them, and getting that and building it through that. But it's going to take us a little while to get there.
Yes, absolutely. It's about a culture change, right? And understanding that the culture of open science and the culture of collaboration and research security need to coexist, and we need to create what that culture of coexistence looks like. And that brings me nicely to the second question, which is really about moving more into the practical of, so how do we integrate research security into international collaborations that our researchers are undertaking? And maybe Dr. Dean, you can kick us off on that question.
So this relates to the international file, and how do we balance international collaboration? So on the international file, there are, I would say, 4 components that relate here. One is international corporate partners. The other is international research more broadly with regards to sorts of networks that Nigel mentioned, and also bilateral arrangements between an institution and another institution. And then on the student side, it's student exchanges and training programs. So let me deal with 2 of them in particular. So international corporate partners. This relates, Wendy, to the discussion earlier about open science. Some members of the audience may know this, but I think this is not necessarily generally known. There are international consortia that sponsor research. If I think about 2 big ones, not mentioning Nigel's, it's the mining sector. So the mining sector has gotten together all the mining corporations globally, many of them, and created an organization that identifies, what are the problems in the mining sector that we need to solve, the sustainability, or let's just list all the problems. And can you all provide some funds to support research with a consortia approach? And previous to the research security issues coming to the forefront, these consortia would then fund researchers at institutions to do research related to key problems for the sector, and then that would be shared broadly across the sector. Now, the geopolitics has caused a change. So we have these global initiatives that have open science and a lot of work to share information now being constrained into, well, how do we make sure that we look at specific areas first or specific countries first? At the University of Waterloo, it's been less of an issue because we've always been focused on Canadian companies and worked with Canadian companies in these consortia. But at the same time, the consortia shares information across all members. So now there is the question of, how do we have greater data protection? And how do we protect the IP more seriously? How do we protect the results so that they are now constrained perhaps to Canadian companies? How do we work more directly? I don't know what that might lead to, whether it might lead to the breakup of these consortia and working with individual companies. But they have been amazing in the past to initiate dialogue on what's needed to drive these sectors forward. Another one is the forestry sector that does the same thing. In terms of international research, there are two kinds, of course, the networks that discuss collaborations and the bilateral relationships with an organization or another institution and the University of Waterloo or any academic institution. So with these bilateral relationships, I think there is the opportunity to think about, is there a risk? How do we mitigate the risk? Are there any issues with regards loss of information and commercialization loss? So those are issues can be dealt with. With regard the networks, that's a little bit more complicated as we bring individuals across the globe together to discuss key issues and problems. And that requires transparency in the partnerships. Finally, I'll say with regards to student exchanges and the training programs at the University of Waterloo and elsewhere, I imagine we've been very careful to make sure that our graduate students are protected in their relationships elsewhere, setting them up for success, making sure their learnings are their own. We have a creator-owned IP policy at the University of Waterloo, and so making sure that the creators actually own the IP makes that we have to have risk mitigation strategies in place. So I would say a lot of transparency in these partnerships. Predictability is important, and also developing clear risk mitigation strategies for students.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And I'd love to hear from the other panelists as well. And we've talked also about this concept of trusted partners. Once you've worked with somebody, whether that's individually, whether that's with a corporation, whether that's even within a network. But it also is a fluid and dynamic environment. And so who was a trusted partner yesterday, are they still a trusted partner tomorrow? And what are the processes that you put in place to assess that? And so I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Smith, or you, Dr. McGee, either on that or any of the other points related to how we go about creating these integrating research security into collaborations.
You've got the mic.
I have the mic in hand. Okay, so I'll be quick, Wendy. I just add on a little bit to what Charmaine was talking about, and that's some of the complexities that we face within university environments. Many universities are very decentralized in the way that they work. That should not come as a surprise to any of you, and that presents some complications, especially when we're talking about research security, because research security touches in a number of different spots across the university. As I mentioned, any time that there's a research grant or contract, that goes through my office. So there's automatic oversight because of it running through my office. So I have oversight, as do people that are tasked specifically to looking at ensuring that we've done our due diligence. Charmaine mentioned about partnerships that we have, especially with other institutions. Not just nationally, but especially internationally. And that's not done in my office. That's done someplace, that's done through another unit. And unless there is really good communication and constant communication at a certain level within the university, they are not going to have the same lens or focus with which my office is going to have to ensure that the due diligence is being undertaken. Is this a safe partner to work with, or is this this university a proxy for a state actor that we are not on the friendliest terms with, for instance? And so that's challenging. And Charmaine also touched upon graduate students. Again, we live in a very global environment where we're looking to seek talent, regardless of whether it's at the graduate student level, postdoctoral fellowship level, faculty level, and they come from across the globe. And so again, those intricacies of bringing those into various researchers' programs and the checks and balances put in place. And again, that's not done in my office.
So maybe I'll pick up on a point related to researchers versus institutions. So you're mentioning that institutions may evolve in terms of trusted state.
Yes.
I think the same is clearly true with the researchers as well, who are quite mobile. So as a research group moves from one institution to another, there is an implication. And this picks up on Charmaine's point in terms of the work that you need to do to get something going is with the researcher. And if the researcher is moving to a different group, then there is an implication there in terms of the research security. So picking the evolution of risk, it's not just is Russia now de rigueur or out of favor or not. I think it's also what is happening at the researcher level as well and the implications there. That is quite challenging to manage. Clearly, you have very little control, but the approaches that have already been mentioned in terms of ensuring due diligence is fulfilled, I think, is part of that process. So as an example, we at Triumph, we have a very strong medical radioisotope program. So we are generating medical isotopes for cancer. And we have a commercialization group called Triumph Innovations. Catherine Hayashi, the CEO, is here today. And Triumph Innovations does that translation of IP for us into societal benefit and commercial work. So they have to do a lot of due diligence when they're building agreements with institutions and companies. So there's the research, and then there's the exploitation of IP connecting into companies. One of the areas that we are struggling a little bit with now is the concept of longevity of that relationship. And so when we build an agreement with a company, the company may get sold and the IP may move. I mean, a lot of IP, obviously, in Canada, as was referenced this morning, a lot of IP in Canada ends up in other countries, especially the US, where you're actually supporting the innovation network there. Mm-hmm. And so that concept of being able to guarantee that IP is retained within Canada is actually quite challenging when you're writing agreements with companies, because they don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, let alone 20 years. And so being able to write into an agreement that IP needs to remain in Canada is a challenge. And I think that's one of the things that we are, frankly, struggling with at the moment in terms of that evolution of risk. So I just, again, highlight there are different levels that we're trying to resolve the problem at the researcher level where you're driving the science, but also at the IP exploitation level where you're working with institutions.
Absolutely. No, it's very true. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about the moment that we're living in right now where there's a big pull towards onshoring, right? To bring everything back home again. But if we think back 20 years, approximately, it was the opposite, right? And the relationships and the research that, if we think about basic research and how it evolves and the time scale on which it evolves versus geopolitics and the time scale upon which that evolves, and then corporate partnerships somewhere in the middle of that are on a different time scale altogether. And so we're trying to combine, predict, and project on all of those axes all at the same time, which I think makes this particularly challenging. And so that's the introduction to my next question, which is, what are some of those biggest challenges and considerations related to implementing research security measures in your organization or in your university? David, you've talked about the fact that universities are not centralized organizations. They're not spaces in which we have command and control environments. And I think if we take ourselves back to the beginning, some of the beginnings of this conversation, that's potentially one of the greatest assets that universities have, is that we're not command and control environments, but yet at the same time, it's perhaps one of the challenges when it comes to implementing research security in a holistic way. I imagine in your organization you have different challenges, so I'd love to hear about what some of those challenges are, and on the more positive side, how you've gone about addressing them.
Thanks, Wendy, for that question, and you're absolutely correct. The universities, the fact that they are complicated and many are decentralized, that's a strength, but it is a weakness. But I think one of the ways to I think going forward that we will need to address some of that is we can still be decentralized, but I think it has to be front and center of everybody's radar, the importance of this, and how research security, how their unit may have some impact on research security, and that be front and center. And I think that's going to have to come from the top. So this is going to have to be an institutional wide focus for us, and every unit, regardless of where you are, is going to need to look through that focus. We aren't there yet as an institution, but I see that that's a direction I think that we're headed into, and it's going to be required. As I mentioned kind of in my opening, one of the challenges that we face in Canada is that we have some very large universities, but we also have a large number of small universities, all of which are doing research, And the biggest challenge that presents is just the disparity in the size of the offices which are overseeing the research being done at the institutions. And when you're an office, and fortunately we're not, as I said, we're large enough that we have a fair number of staff in our research office. But there are many in our region where their research office is staff of 3 or 2. That becomes really difficult to manage, and we're still in a pilot phase here with the Alliance grant through NSERC. That is going to move beyond a pilot very quickly, at least in my most recent conversations with the group. That's going to move fairly quickly throughout the Tri-Council, throughout the whole Tri-Council programs and things. So that's only going to increase the number of touch points, potential touch points that offices are going to have to deal with. I think in some respects that also presents an opportunity for us to how to help all universities, but especially those that are smaller, and that is we may have to do some regionalization here. And in the Atlantic region, we have various regional organizations, and some that have worked much better than others. But this may be an opportunity where we take advantage of some regionalization, again, kind of looking to pool our resources and to pool those lists of who people have worked with, who are considered as good partners, who have not made that list, et cetera, and being somewhat open to share that. And not being protective of I can't tell you who I'm partnering with as an institution. So I think that promotes an opportunity for us that we're going to have to really explore, because I think that will be the only possible solution where we can take advantage of that. The other challenge that we face is. I like to tell people, I have an interesting role in that, in this role, I'm dealing with about 450 independent contractors at my university, and that's the way faculty and researchers generally view themselves as an independent contractor. It's my research, it's my ideas, I'm doing all of this. And so, again, what is critical is that relationship that's built between the overseers, my office, and our research faculty. Again, I think this is where we have an advantage of our size. I don't have 1,000 or 1,500 faculty. I have 450, and so that relationship building is much easier to do. And I think again that provides us an opportunity, and we've already used that where we can sit down and have conversation with our faculty and researchers and saying, are you really sure you want to do this partnership? Here are some concerns. Here's why we are concerned. What is the implication if you go down this road? What is the implication with the other partnerships that you may have, whether that's with other not-for-profits or for-profits or government organizations, and really forcing them to stop and think and pause on that. It's not an easy conversation to have, but I think if you have that relationship, you can do that. And we've been fortunate to have that. The just one other thing, as I said, the Alliance program, as we know, that's been the pilot. It is going to expand beyond that. Certainly into the Tri-Council. I suspect that we're headed to anything that the federal government supports, financially. Will eventually come under those rules, and I would hope, quite frankly, that all of our provinces follow suit. And I think they will. And again, that's just going to increase the pressures on us to do it. But I think that shines the lens very clearly, and I think will ensure that our researchers recognize that this is important. We need to think about this. We need to really vet carefully.
No, and I really appreciate what you're saying about collaboration, because I think it's true not just from a size and resources perspective, but also from a risk management perspective, because the phenomenon of push down pop up, right? So as soon as you tighten security in one place, the actor that's trying to perpetrate something that's not good is going to find the place where that security is not as tight and just pop up over there. And so if we think about ourselves as a security ecosystem across various research organizations, universities across country, and then across the world, we have to think about the interconnectedness of it and the resources that need to come alongside and the structures that need to come alongside that in order to create that awareness, that culture that we're talking about, and that truly secure environment. Dr. Smith, would you like to add anything to Dr. McGee's comments?
Sure. So I think we've really been talking about culture in a lot of cases here in terms of how we drive into the organizations the need to think in a slightly different way about research and research security. But to your point, one of the things that I wanted to pick up on was cybersecurity as an area. I think this is very specific, but it's actually it goes to your pop-up approach, that is an area that we are seeing greater action in. And one of the things that has struck me over the last couple of years is when people think about hacking, they think about somebody in a basement working alone. We're no longer in that model. We're now in a model where nation states are engaging in cyber attacks. And so we have to think in a very different way as research organizations that the IP that we have is being sought after. And we have to think about this in not just in that gentle way of, we've got to stop the teenagers getting in, we've got to stop nation states getting in. So one of the challenges that we are facing, talking about Triumph, one of the challenges that we're facing at Triumph is trying to overlay that requirement onto an infrastructure which is not really designed for that situation. And so we're going through processes at the moment, obviously, of looking at cybersecurity with a very different lens, having to invest heavily in new hardware, new people, new ways of approaching things so that people are thinking in a different way about cybersecurity. That takes money, and that's part of the challenge, is having enough resources to protect the organization from these sort of attacks. My CIO was giving me some stats from a 2022 Sophos paper that in 2021, 64% of academic institutions were attacked, of whom 75 were hacked, of whom 50% had ransomware applied, and they paid the ransom to get their data back up. The average payout was $1.4 million US. That's a substantial. That's not eligible. That's a problem for me, right? So we have to stop that happening to really ensure that we are protected. And okay, that's not nation state, but that is effectively organized crime coming after the institution for a different reason. It's not necessarily looking for the IP, but it's looking for that soft target, if you like. And so I think we all have to harden our protections, and that requires resources. So I certainly say that's an issue.
Absolutely. Dr. Dean, did you want to add?
Just briefly playing off both Nigel and David, and mentioning again the independence of researchers. I think one of the biggest challenges is this culture change and communication with researchers. And I'll put it in the context of an example that is personal to me. I've been watching the traffic in my lab, and only recently been aware that my researchers are trying to solve a problem, my students, and they know where the experts are. And so the natural thing to do is to reach out to the experts and say, listen, we know that you're working on this problem. We're working on it in my lab. Can we share ideas? Can we talk about what you're doing? Here's a stumbling block that I'm facing. Have you faced that stumbling block? It's the whole point of conferences, really. I mean, in some will say conferences are a mechanism to share and disseminate results. But the side conversations that happen at conferences are really integral to the advancement of research. People get together and talk about the problems that they're facing. So if you ask what's the biggest challenge, I think it's working with researchers one-on-one to understand what they're doing and to understand whether there are any risks and how can we protect them and how can we take the ownership of that on the institution rather than on the researcher. I'll just mention one other thing, and it plays off David's comment. He mentioned, meeting of the minds and sharing resources. And I'll give a plug to Ontario. I'm sure this is happening, or it will happen in New Brunswick as well. But the Ontario universities have created a research security working group with the help of the Council of Ontario Universities. And so that working group shares information and resources across all Ontario universities. And we've also brought together the directors of corporate partnership to share best practice across, what are issues that research offices are facing and how can we help. And if you'll permit me one final thing, I had the honor of serving the University of Waterloo in developing its anti-racism strategy. So I would like to mention that, one of the issues that I think that also needs addressing is what is perceived as racial profiling in the research security area.
Yes, absolutely. A very, very important point that we need to be very clear about the problem that we're trying to solve and focus on the problem that we're trying to solve and not necessarily think or categorize or prejudge who might be perpetrating that problem. So the last question, and before I turn it over to the floor, is I'll pose it slightly differently than it is on the paper, but if you were to if you knew then what you know now about research security, what lessons have you drawn? What advice would you give to the people in the room today about how best to integrate research security? What do you wish you had done maybe differently when you first started on this journey that you think might have set you up in a different place? What would you share from that perspective with the folks in the room? And I want to give each of you an opportunity to answer that question. Who would like to start? Thank you, David.
At least I think I can start. So,
absolutely.
I'll give a particular from our university. As I said, at UMB, all research has to go through my office. And one of the things we preach, and I think it's particularly relevant to the question you just asked, Wendy, and that is one of the things that we continue to preach with our researchers is involve my office at the very beginning, not at the very end. We have those that are very good at the former and those that are very good at the latter. And I say that, and it's become very, very evident for me sitting in this role that is that the earlier that the office is involved, the fewer the problems we have, because they're going in with the lens of our IP, what's happening there, the partnership, the research security. They're going in with that very much on their radar, and that's how they're approaching it. Researchers left to their own devices, they never ask those questions. It's all about the funding opportunity and the partnership that may come from that, and what they can gain from that. And trying to undo that when that's really far down the road, trying to undo that or walk it back is very painful. And so I think, again, trying to build on our mechanisms that as early as we can get in, and again, this is a cultural change. Again, I think the more we get it on our researchers' mind that you need to be thinking about this on day one, not the 11th hour, the 11th minute of the 11th hour.
Absolutely.
I think David's hit it on the head, the engagement with the researchers. I would say a strategic approach, bringing in all the players that deal with international relationships and being able to sit around the table and talk about, as an institution, how are we going to support the risk mitigation strategies that are required to manage the file. We are doing that now with the help of our new Director of Security. We had a work plan that developed that took everything into account, taking account of your devices, your networks. I talked about this at the start, alumni, but now actually bringing people together to talk about how do we interconnect and how do we support researchers. I'd like to mention one other thing to add to David's, and that is that the new partnerships we want to bring the researchers in to talk about them and risk mitigation strategy. But we have researchers who have been having long-term partnerships with groups, organizations that they have been encouraged to partner with through global affairs, through, the High Commissioner's office, the Trade Office. And so now, given that they have these long-term, the challenge is now thinking about is there a risk? What's the risk mitigation? When they've been working with these groups with the government as well, for a good 10 years or so. So the new partnerships, I think, are something that we can educate our researchers on. But the long-standing ones, those are a little bit more challenging. How do we turn on them? How do we look at them differently?
Yeah, the evolution. Absolutely.
I think I said it all. I think awareness from the researcher of the current situation and currency of knowledge is critical. So making sure that you are communicating as an organization to the research teams the current state of knowledge, but that has to be overlaid with the long-term nature of especially in the work that we do, for instance, the projects we work on can take 10 to 15 years to build and then 10 to 20 years to run. And so the life cycle aspect of a research program needs to be cognizant that things may evolve and have some strategies at the beginning in terms of, how do we evolve the research relationship if things are evolving? This is a very challenging thing to put in place when you don't actually know where, nobody's got the crystal ball about where you're going to go.
Absolutely. The floor is now open. Are there any questions that people would like to ask? Yeah, absolutely.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. I really enjoyed it. My name is Peter Severinson. I'm the Director of Policy at MyTax currently. So my question is really all about the trade-off between partnerships and collaboration and research security. This matters to me because my organization is really all about that collaborations. We're connecting, academics with industry, with students internationally, domestically. So if there is a cost to be paid in terms of collaboration in order to achieve good security, I mean, that's very scary. That's terrifying because we exist to do that. So I'd love to hear your opinion. Is there a trade-off in terms of our ability to collaborate that is unavoidable when we increase security? Or do you think there's a way we can thread that needle to kind of get the best of both worlds? And if there is, what do you think is the path to kind of achieve that kind of maybe utopian situation? Thank you very much.
It's an excellent question.
Great question.
Excusez-moi, Johan Saint-Onge from Canadian Space Agency. I have a sub-question to that, and then that's going to be, I think you touched the point in terms of trade-off, like in terms of climate change and environment, like in terms of resiliency, something that we talked about with, new players, African countries, big demography, like in terms of trade-off for resiliency, impact, based on security, IP, wealth on one side, resiliency and capacity to cope with the changes on the other side. Yeah, in terms of indicators, like where do you base yourself? Thank you.
C'est parfait, merci.
So I think this goes back to the distinction between undertaking the research and then exploiting the benefits of that research through the IP. So as an example, some of the technologies that we develop at Triumph for research, so some of the, I'll give you an example related to water quality, which sounds pretty dull, but is actually really important in the research that we're doing because the water in one of the detectors needs to be really pure. So a technique has been developed to ensure that the water quality is insanely good in the detector that we're using. That then can be applied for societal benefit externally. And so there are research programs that are now being developed with the far north, with indigenous communities, to look at the quality of water in real time rather than needing to do sampling. So real-time monitoring of water quality as a societal benefit, especially in the north. So it's not, I don't think it's a one size fits all in terms of research security related to the research itself. It's the components of that. So the research that led to that technology was international. It's a project in Japan. It's got multinational organizations engaged. We've inspired people to undertake the neutrino physics that's required there. But the IP that's created can then be applied elsewhere. So getting the balance, I think it is multifaceted, because already mentioned, I mean, the fact that we can no longer collaborate with Russia has had a direct implication on some of the experiments that we're engaged in, like Atlas at CERN, and we had to work our way around that. But the driver in terms of research and the ability to use the IP for societal benefit, it's not directly coupled necessarily.
Dr. Dean, did you want to?
I'd like to get back to the MITAC's question in particular. And for heaven's sakes, I hope that MITACs is able to drive research collaborations and overcome some of the barriers. We're just starting this journey. It's not, we haven't even got the results from the alliance grants yet, all of them. So we're just at the start of this journey. I think one of the key drivers to make sure that we continue on the path to do industry academic collaboration is to make sure that we support the researchers. We take the onus off the researchers in terms of this being their problem, and we put it on the shoulders of individuals who can support, either through a group approach, as David mentioned, and we are doing in Ontario, or through support from in organizations that have the resources to help individuals understand what are the best risk mitigation strategies. We need the researchers continuing to collaborate, but we need a good engagement with them so that we can help them understand what are the issues and help them make the right decisions. But it's so important that MITACs and agencies like MITACs be able to foster academic industry collaborations. This is really important for economic growth and driving, the right sorts of research to happen at institutions. I shouldn't say that, but driving research to happen at institutions that will support our industries being successful in Canada. So I hope that MITACs is able to assure the researchers that the offices of research that they're working with will help them with the risk mitigation strategies and just keep them going in the direction of collaboration, but bringing in the engagement so that we can make that risk mitigation strategy happen. David.
Thanks, Charmaine. Just quickly to add on, I won't give the statistics, but as Charmaine said, we are very early in this journey, and I think if there's at least something positive that we've heard so far, Charmaine mentioned about the alliance. So again, the alliance program has been the pilot. The number of projects that have no issues with national security are far and away the majority. Yep. Hugely far and away the majority. And I think that I think hopefully should give us some confidence that the partners that we are working with are good, trusted partners, and that there's exceptions. They aren't the norm, right? So if there are going to be a few, so I think to the MITACs, I mean, absolutely MITACs. So that's what you're in the business of doing, and please keep doing it and keep going and keep ramping up, because it is important, not just for universities, but it's certainly very important for Canada. I think our partnerships generally are strong. We are going, as I said, we are going to have an exception here or there, but I don't think we want to think that, most of our partnerships are not good ones. They are very trusted.
Yeah. No, I think that's excellent.
Hi, yeah, my name is Chris Webb, and I appreciate the thought-provoking discussion this morning. I've recently relocated to Ontario, having spent 20 years supporting the research and innovation ecosystem in the States. And there was a former president whose name I rarely mention in polite company. Research security was a huge issue, and there were a lot of heavy-handed rules that got handed down. And so as research dean, I had to implement some of those, and it had a significant impact on some of the research, some legitimate, I would say relatively low to no risk research, and it really stifled that. Mm-hmm. And so my question to you is, do you have any thoughts on how to best balance the requirements that research security brings on and or these bureaucratic rules and regulations that get handed down from above, and balance that with the academic research and innovation mission and academic freedom and allowing some of these very important international collaborations to continue?
And if I can permit myself, one of the things that I think is a challenge in Canadian institutions is many of our collaborators are American. And so while our context might not have the same rules as the American context, our researchers need to collaborate across borders where the rules are different. And so how do we balance that? How do we inform our researchers and not quash international research collaboration with some of our closest allies?
Right. Thank you.
So maybe I can pick up on that.
Absolutely.
In terms of balancing direction, clearly the direction is something that one needs to take on board, because that's you are getting direction from government or the funding agency about what needs to be done. So I think the challenge is to incorporate that into your processes in a way that doesn't stifle the ability for researchers to undertake their work. And that goes back to some of the comments we've already made in terms of providing a service, providing team services, providing support structures, so that the academics themselves, the researchers themselves, don't get bogged down in questions about supply chain or critical goods and things like that being shipped across the border. So that does require an overlay of a team that is very aware of the requirements of government. And government, the point you're making is that in terms of shipping goods, we are held to the US standards for electronics and nuclear material, for instance. So we have to make sure we're aware of all of the relevant legislation and codes that we have to adhere to, and ensure that you're not asking the individual researcher to undertake and be aware of all of that, as well as be aware of the research environment. So I think it's ensuring that you have an overlay of support, that's the wrong word, underpin of support maybe, to ensure that the researchers can focus on what's important to them.
Yeah, I'm hearing an undercurrent that we need to make sure that we're not expecting individual researchers to become research security experts. Are there other comments that?
Hi, my name is Ankoy. I work at NSERC. I had a question about a topic you briefly discussed previously. So there's a tension between open science and research security, but in the open science world, there's a lot of consideration to ensuring that there's equity, that equity is ensured through open access and open science. What are the approaches that are adopted here as it pertains to research security? What are equity considerations that are considered through research security?
And by equity, are you speaking about?
Well, for example, how do we ensure that researchers in other country partnerships are maintained?
Global equity.
Yeah, we're not, yeah.
Global equity of access.
So maybe I can give an example from the astronomy world, where the balance is maintained there in terms of the researchers that have invested their careers and time in undertaking the research, but it's done under an open access framework. And it's very standard in many of the telescopes or space missions that there will be a period of time where the data are basically only available to the research collaboration. And then at some point after that, the data are released, so that you're balancing the open science requirements against the drive for the researcher to actually collect the data and undertake the research. That doesn't necessarily cross into all research realms in terms of data release, but certainly the concept of ensuring that there is more information available than just a publication, I think, is a key part of open science, so that people can recreate from these large data sets, they can recreate the results that are being published at some point afterwards. So I think, to me, it's a temporal question that you want to make sure that there is a period where you're effectively benefiting the researcher, but then filling into the open access requirements for equity following that.
Excellent. Other comments?
So we'll have our last question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Brad Wallace. I work with the Department of National Defense, their IDEAS program, their Open Innovation Program. And so I come at this question of research security also with an eye as to national security. And one of the things about IDEAS is we're looking for people who perhaps may not have thought that their research had a defense and security nexus to come in and work with us. Now, what this means, of course, is we bring in a lot of people who are new to this whole idea about the national security side. Now, I'm not going to ask about what you're doing or anything, but what I would like to know, because this is something we've actually thought about, is what could we on the federal government side, the defense and security side, do to perhaps assist you in keeping the research security, not just from an IP point of view, but also from a national security point of view? Is there anything that we can do?
That's a very good question.
So I'll answer a question. I don't know if I'll answer your question. But I know that researchers are hungry to be able to develop new tools and techniques, and they are looking for partners in order to facilitate the hiring of grad students and support. I would say that the government, in tandem with what I would say as putting up barriers, if you forgive me, we need to understand how to make those barriers low and support researchers, as was discussed with MITACs. But there's the other side of the coin, and that is the opportunity side. And we would like to see much more opportunity coming forward. Great program, the IDEAS program. How can we engage government partners, Environment Canada? Defense is a really important one. You've got so much work to do in so many different areas, from satellites to the north to sensors. I'd love to be able to see the opportunity side opening up so that we can build engagements with our researchers and allow that hunger for developing new tools and projects and supporting the research students, allow all that to happen. In terms of support, with those collaborations, there is the opportunity also for engagement and also training our faculty members on, where there might be risks related to research through conversations, through workshops, etc. But the biggest thing that the Government of Canada's departments can do, and particularly defense, and we know sustainability file is really important for Canada right now, so I'll also mention the agencies dealing with that, is to open doors up to researchers. So to let that research thrive through a reduction of barriers requires a double approach. One of them is the security side, but the other one is the opening of doors to the areas where we'd really like to see the research partnerships flourish.
Maybe I could pick up on your specific question about national security. I think one of the challenges that we face as a research community is actually understanding what the national security threat landscape is. I've had discussions where you are trying to interpolate what's being said to apply that to to the reality on the ground. So, and I think this perhaps goes to what we were saying earlier in terms of having a layer which supports the researcher. That layer should really have an understanding of the national security threat landscape, so that they can then, without necessarily needing to push that down into the research community, they can understand the sort of challenges that the government is facing and the areas that we need to be cognizant and sensitive to. So, the answer is, unfortunately, be more open.
Hey, I'm all for that.
Yeah, and I think is it okay? And I'll do you want to go first? Go
Sorry, Wendy. I was just going to add quickly into that, and Nigel really touched it. And I think it comes down to communication, and openness to share that communication. We've talked about, Charmaine's talked about the group in Ontario that's getting together and sharing that. I think it's not always obvious what may be a national security issue. There are many which are obvious national security issues. If we're talking about nuclear or biohazards or biosafety and things like that. There are other I'm sure items which will be of national security importance, which may not be obvious to certainly many researchers and things. So I think it's important, and I know ISED is working on this of having a group of a working group and continuing having that working group from various portfolios, not just ISED. There's ISED and public safety and on and on and on, and which I would think DND might want to be part of that as well. Again, sharing what's going on, what the current landscape is, best practices, et cetera, and things like that.
That is excellent. I know we're at time, but I'd love to end on a hopeful note. When we started these conversations a few years back, I remember sitting in a room with some folks from some security-oriented government departments and receiving some information that caused you to think, oh my gosh, we need to get on this. But one of the things that was really, really difficult was for them to share enough so that we knew what to do when we left the room. And one of the pieces that I'm very encouraged by, and we do have a journey that we need to continue to go on, but the culture of mutual understanding that has been able to be fostered between a number of security-related departments via ISED, through the granting councils as well, with institutions from across the board at the table, so that we're able to speak the same language to one another. Because that was also one of the biggest challenges, is that we were being briefed, but we didn't have a common framework in which we could have that conversation. So we do desperately need, at a certain level, to be read in on the threats if we're going to be able to practically know what to do when we get home to our institutions, and be able to convince our 40,000 contractors that there really is an issue, right? Because then it's not just fear-mongering. And so we've made a lot of progress in creating that culture, creating that awareness. And yet I think there is also a journey for us to continue to go on together, because we've heard across the panel this morning that the thing that's going to help us the most is to create a common culture of awareness around risk. And so with that, I want to thank each of our panelists for being with us this morning. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for taking the time to share your experiences and pointing us in a direction on an issue that's super important as we continue to both innovate, create new science, create new ideas, and as well as create an environment where research security thrives. So thank you very much.